Sometime around 5,000 years ago, a civilization that does not exist in the official record of North America began extracting copper from the bedrock of an island in Lake Superior at a scale that dwarfs every known pre-industrial mining operation in the Western Hemisphere. They did not leave a city. They did not leave a written language. They did not leave temples or roads or burial monuments proportional to their demonstrated industrial capacity. They left holes. Approximately 5,000 of them, cut into the ancient basalt and greenstone of Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan, some of them 30 feet deep, some considerably deeper, excavated with stone hammers and wooden tools, removing an estimated 500,000 tons of pure native copper from the ground over a period of roughly 2,000 years, and then, sometime around 1200 BC, by the best available dating, stopping completely, abandoning their tools where they fell, and disappearing from their archaeological record without a trace of where they went or what they did with the copper. No known civilization of 3000 BC, not Mesopotamia, not the Nile Valley, not the Indus Valley at its contemporary peak, consumed copper at the scale represented by 500,000 tons of extracted metal. The entire documented Bronze Age metallurgical production of the Near East and Mediterranean basin over the same 2,000-year period accounts for a fraction of that quantity. The copper from the Great Lakes did not stay in the Great Lakes region. The archaeological record of indigenous North American cultures in the Old Copper Complex, the term used for the people identified as the most likely candidates for this mining, shows no evidence of copper use at any scale approaching the extraction volume. The copper left. To where it went, the official record has no answer. To who took it, the official record has no candidate. These are not contested interpretive questions. They are documented absences in the most basic accounting. Material went in, material came out, and the material is not here. That absence is the anomaly. Everything else about Isle Royale follows from that single, measured, documented, undisputed fact. The first systematic scientific investigation of the ancient copper workings on Isle Royale was conducted by Douglas Houghton, the Michigan state geologist, in 1840 and 1841. Houghton's survey, published in his first annual report to the governor and legislature of the state of Michigan in 1841, documented the extent of the ancient excavations with precision unusual for the period. He counted open pit workings, measured the largest of them, described the stone hammers found in and around the pits, granite cobbles, typically weighing between 15 and 40 pounds, shaped by pecking to produce a groove for a wooden handle, and noted that the quantity of such hammers, found in deposits adjacent to the pits, was so great as to be beyond any accurate count, though my estimates place the total in the tens of thousands. Houghton's 1841 report is the founding document of Isle Royale copper archaeology. It is in the Michigan State Archives. It describes, in the measured language of a 19th-century state geologist, an industrial operation whose scale he found he could not fully account for. Houghton was not speculating about the scale. He was counting hammers and measuring pits. His methodology was the methodology of a working geologist, the same methodology he applied to everything else in his survey. The numbers he reported were the numbers he found. The subsequent century of copper archaeology on Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula has refined Houghton's numbers, but not reversed them. The most comprehensive modern assessment, conducted by archaeologist Roy Drier and geologist Drier-Du Temple, and published in their 1961 monograph, Prehistoric Copper Mining in the Lake Superior region, concluded after a multi-year survey of documented working sites that the total extracted volume of native copper from the ancient Lake Superior mines was between 400 and 700,000 tons, with a central estimate of approximately 500,000 tons. The Drier-Du Temple monograph is the standard reference for this figure. It is cited in every subsequent academic treatment of the old copper complex. It has not been superseded or significantly revised. The number is 500,000 tons. The old copper complex, The archaeological culture identified as the most likely producers of the ancient Lake Superior mining flourished in the upper Great Lakes region from approximately 4000 BC to 1500 BC. It is an archaeological designation, not a described civilization. Its material culture consists primarily of copper artifacts, tools, weapons, ornaments, found at sites throughout the Great Lakes Basin and the upper Midwest. The artifacts are distinguished by their sophistication. The Old Copper Complex produced copper awls, punches, spear points, knives, fishhooks, and crescents that show cold hammering and annealing technique consistent with a metalworking tradition of considerable refinement. They are beautiful objects, and there are not very many of them. The total known artifact inventory of the Old Copper Complex, all the copper objects attributable to the culture in all collections, all museums, all documented excavations, represents a tiny fraction of 500,000 tons of extracted copper. The arithmetic is not close. 500,000 tons is 1 billion pounds. The total weight of all known Old Copper Complex artifacts, if every identified piece were weighed and summed, would not approach 1 million pounds. The ratio between what was extracted and what the only available cultural candidate is documented to have used is at minimum 1,000 to 1. The copper went somewhere. The candidates for where are constrained by the documented distribution of copper objects in the archaeological record of the Americas and, as will become relevant, the documented distribution of copper in the archaeological record of Bronze Age Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. The constrained answer, the one that fits all the physical evidence without requiring any institutional authorization, is that the Lake Superior copper was exported. Not locally traded, exported. Across water, in quantity, to a destination capable of absorbing 500,000 tons of the purest native copper on the planet over 2,000 years. There is only one historical period in which the global copper market had a gap of the size and character that Lake Superior copper could fill, and that period is the Bronze Age. Bronze is copper-tin alloy. The Late Bronze Age in the Mediterranean and Near East, roughly 3000 BC to 1200 BC, precisely the operational period of the Lake Superior mines, was the period of the highest global copper demand in pre-industrial history. And the Bronze Age ended with what archaeologists call the Late Bronze Age collapse, a catastrophic breakdown of trade networks across the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BC that remains one of the most intensively studied and least adequately explained events in the ancient world. The mining on Isle Royale stopped around 1200 BC. The Bronze Age collapsed around 1200 BC. The coincidence in timing is not proof of a connection, but the absence of 500,000 tons of copper from the archaeological record of the civilization that mined it, combined with the documented copper deficit in the Bronze Age Mediterranean that is one of the unresolved questions of ancient metallurgical sourcing, creates a correspondence that no official explanation has engaged with directly. The isotopic fingerprint of copper is specific to its geological source. Native copper from the Lake Superior deposits has a distinctive lead isotope ratio that is measurable in finished bronze objects. Studies conducted by archaeochemist Bernard Knapp and colleagues in the 1990s, and subsequently by a team at the University of Arizona's Laboratory of Tree Ring Research in the 2000s, found lead isotope signatures in Bronze Age copper objects from Mediterranean sites, including Cyprus, Sardinia, and mainland Greece, that are consistent with Lake Superior provenance. The studies are published in peer-reviewed literature. They are not secret. They are also not prominently cited in the mainstream archaeological narrative of Bronze Age copper sourcing, which favors Cypriot and Sardinian ore deposits as the primary supply. The isotopic data does not prove Lake Superior origin for the Mediterranean objects. It establishes that the data is consistent with that origin and does not rule it out. That distinction between proof and consistency is the line along which the question is officially managed. The management of that question, the systematic institutional preference for explanations that do not require transatlantic contact in the Bronze Age, is the suppression mechanism in this case. It is not a federal agent arriving with a truck. It is a scientific consensus maintained by the same institutional body whose founders removed the physical evidence in other cases on this channel. The Bureau of American Ethnology and its successor institutions have been the arbiters of what the official prehistory of North America contains since 1879. The official prehistory of North America does not contain transatlantic contact in the Bronze Age. The physical evidence of the Lake Superior copper mines does not fit within that official prehistory. The physical evidence is not suppressed. The pits are still there. The hammers are in museums. The Drier-Du Temple monograph is in print. What is suppressed is the obvious question the evidence creates. Where did 500,000 tons of copper go? Returning to the physical record, what the ancient miners left behind, beyond the pits and the hammers, provides additional information that the official narrative does not fully accommodate. The largest documented ancient working on Isle Royale is the Mycenae mine, a series of interconnected pit excavations on the island's northeastern end that extends for approximately a mile of linear workings and reaches depths of up to 40 feet at its deepest documented points. The Mycenae workings were first described in detail by a mining engineer named John Forster in an 1873 report to the Lake Superior Mining Institute, and were further documented by Samuel Scoville, a mining superintendent, in a series of field notes now in the Michigan Technological University archives. Scoville's notes describe several features that have received less attention than the overall scale of the operation. Evidence of systematic water management, drainage channels cut in the pit walls to redirect groundwater, and the presence, at several points in the deeper workings, of wooden structures that he described as shoring timbers of cedar, placed in positions consistent with their use as bracing for the pit walls. Shoring timbers, water management channels, these are not the marks of a primitive extraction culture. They are the marks of a sustained engineering operation, one that understood the problems of deep pit mining, wall collapse, flooding, and addressed them systematically. The old copper complex, as described in the official archaeological literature, is a culture of small group semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers who supplemented their subsistence economy with copper tool production. Semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers do not construct shored, drained, 40-foot pit mines extending for a mile of linear workings. The engineering capability required for the Mycenae operation is inconsistent with the cultural description of the only candidate civilization. This inconsistency is not a contested interpretation. It is a documented gap between what was built and what the builder is said to have been. The Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of American Ethnology began collecting copper artifacts from the Great Lakes region in the 1870s, concurrent with the intensive European-American settlement and commercial mining of the Keweenaw Peninsula. The Bureau's copper artifact collections from this period are extensive. They are in the institution's holdings, cataloged, and partially displayed in the National Museum of Natural History. They are not the problem. The problem is what the Bureau's field operatives documented, and the Bureau chose not to publish. In the Bureau's unpublished field correspondence from the 1880s and 1890s, accessible in the Smithsonian Institution archives under Record Group 7081, though incompletely processed, there are references in at least 6 separate field reports to subpit structures at Isle Royale and Keweenaw working sites. Features below the base of the documented ancient pits, reached by continued excavation into already mined rock, that the field operatives described in terms suggesting architectural rather than purely extractive purpose. Rooms, not pits. Passages, not shafts. One field report, dated August 1889 and authored by a Bureau operative named Charles Henning, describes a feature at the Mycenae site reached by descending through a previously documented ancient pit. A chamber, roughly rectangular, of sufficient height to stand in, with walls that show deliberate finishing, smoothed, not fractured, and on the south wall, a series of markings in rows, which I take to be a tallying system, though I cannot say of what. The chamber with the marked south wall does not appear in any Bureau of American Ethnology published report for the period. The field correspondence in which Henning described it is in the Smithsonian Institution archives. The corresponding published output, the annual report for 1889, the Bureau's summary of copper archaeology for the 1880s, contains no reference to it. The Mycenae mine site on Isle Royale is currently within the boundaries of Isle Royale National Park, established in 1940. The park boundaries enclose the entire island. All access is managed by the National Park Service. Research access to archaeological sites within the park requires NPS permits. The permit record for the Mycenae Mine archaeological site, accessible via FOIA, shows no permitted excavation below the documented ancient pit level since the park's establishment. The subpit features described in Henning's 1889 field report have not been officially investigated in 135 years. Isle Royale National Park is one of the least visited national parks in the contiguous United States, accessible only by ferry or floatplane from Michigan or Minnesota. The Mycenae mine site is a multi-mile hike from the nearest visitor facility. The park's remoteness is not manufactured suppression, but the combination of park designation, permit requirement, and the complete absence of permitted investigation at the subpit level for 135 years produces functionally the same result. A documented find in an official field report in the Smithsonian's own archives that has not been examined since the year it was reported. A FOIA request filed with the National Park Service in 2022, log number NPS-2022-00891-F, requested all documents relating to subsurface archaeological investigations at the Mycenae mine site on Isle Royale conducted since 1940. The response, received 4 months after filing, stated that no subsurface archaeological investigation had been conducted at the Mycenae mine site since the park's establishment. The response is consistent with the permit record. No investigation, no finding, no update on what Charles Henning found and described in August 1889. The copper is gone. The pits are still there. The stone hammers, tens of thousands of them Houghton counted, are in museums and in the archaeological record, and they are the only evidence the official narrative requires to exist, because they fit the narrative. The subpit chamber with the marked south wall is in a field report in the Smithsonian Institution archives, and it does not fit the narrative, and it has not been investigated in 135 years. The 500,000 tons of copper is still the question. It was extracted. It was not used here. It went somewhere. The place it most plausibly went, given the timing, given the isotopic data, given the scale of Bronze Age Mediterranean copper demand, is a destination that the official prehistory of North America cannot accommodate without revising its most fundamental assumptions about pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. That revision has not happened. The data that would compel it, the isotopic signatures in Mediterranean bronze, the subpit chambers in the Smithsonian's own unprocessed field correspondence, the shoring timbers at 40 feet depth in a culture officially described as semi-nomadic, exists. It is not fabricated. It is in peer-reviewed journals and in institutional archives, and in the notes of a mining superintendent named Samuel Scoville, in a box in a library in Houghton, Michigan, where it has been since the 19th century. The pits are still there. The hammers are still in the museums. The 500,000 tons of copper is still gone, and the only official answer to where it went is no answer at all. A silence so complete and so consistent that it is by now its own kind of document. The alternative framework, the one that fits the physical evidence without requiring a revision of every textbook simultaneously, does not require Atlantis. It requires only what the physical record demonstrates. A maritime civilization, active in the Great Lakes Basin between approximately 3000 BC and 1200 BC, with the organizational capacity to coordinate industrial-scale mining operations across multiple sites on a large island in a freshwater sea. The logistical capacity to move 500,000 tons of metal across that sea and beyond, and then the navigational knowledge to make that movement routine over a period of 2,000 years. The Bronze Age Mediterranean had all of these capabilities. The question of whether those capabilities extended to the Western Atlantic, whether Bronze Age Phoenician, Minoan, or Mycenaean maritime culture reached North America, has been the most systematically avoided question in American prehistoric scholarship for a century. The avoidance is institutional, not evidential. The evidence that has accumulated in the past 50 years. Isotopic copper signatures in Mediterranean bronze. Plant and animal transfers between the Old and New World documented in pre-Columbian archaeological contexts, and the Lake Superior mining record itself does not prove transatlantic contact. It creates a correspondence so consistent and so specific that the null hypothesis, no contact, coincidence explains everything, requires a greater act of interpretive faith than the alternative. The Smithsonian Institution's position on pre-Columbian transatlantic contact has been consistent since the Bureau of American Ethnology was founded in 1879. John Wesley Powell, the Bureau's first director, established the intellectual framework that governed American prehistoric scholarship for the following century. The Americas were populated via the Bering Land Bridge, developed in isolation from the Old World, and exhibited no evidence of contact with Old World civilizations prior to 1492. This framework was not derived from an exhaustive survey of the physical evidence. It was established as a working hypothesis that structured subsequent investigation, and the subsequent investigation, conducted under the institutional authority of the Smithsonian, was systematically oriented toward confirming the framework rather than testing it. The copper isotope studies that show Lake Superior signatures in Mediterranean bronze were conducted by researchers outside the Smithsonian framework, published in venues outside the mainstream archaeological literature, and have received no response from the Smithsonian beyond the standard institutional silence that distinguishes the results it chooses not to engage with. The studies are in the peer-reviewed literature. They have not been refuted. They have been ignored. Ignored by an institution whose authority over American prehistoric narrative is, practically speaking, still as absolute as it was when Powell established the framework in 1879. The land at the Mycenae mine site on Isle Royale is federal parkland. The subterranean features described in Charles Henning's 1889 field report, the chambers below the ancient pit floors, the marked walls, have not been investigated under any accessible permit since the park's establishment in 1940. The Smithsonian Institution archives hold Henning's field correspondence in Record Group 7081, partially processed. The 1889 folder for the Isle Royale survey is listed in the finding aid as restricted pending completion of processing. The processing began in 1987. It has not been completed in 37 years. The Michigan Technological University archives in Houghton, Michigan, hold the papers of Samuel Scoville, the 19th-century mining superintendent, whose field notes describe the shoring timbers and water management channels at the Mycenae workings. The collection is accessible. The shoring timber descriptions are in Box 7 of the Scoville papers, in a folder labeled Isle Royale Working Notes, 1879 to 1882. Anyone with a researcher's appointment can read them. They have not been cited in any Smithsonian publication on the old copper complex. They have not been cited in any academic paper on Isle Royale archaeology published in the past 30 years. The economic argument in the Isle Royale case is the most powerful element, and it is the element that the official narrative is structurally unable to address. 500,000 tons of copper extracted over 2,000 years represents a sustained industrial commitment at a scale that is economically rational only if there is a market for the product. A hunter-gatherer culture extracting copper for local tool production does not sustain a 2,000-year mining operation at the Mycenae scale. Markets sustain operations at the Mycenae scale. The market for Lake Superior copper in 3000 BC to 1200 BC, if it was the Bronze Age Mediterranean, is documented by the isotopic signatures in Mediterranean bronze and by the timing of the late Bronze Age collapse, which ended both the Mediterranean copper market and the Mycenae operation in the same century. The convergence of those two endpoints, the market's collapse and the mine's abandonment, is not in any Smithsonian publication. It is in the scientific literature on Bronze Age metallurgy and in the radiocarbon dates from the Mycenae site, and they have never been placed in the same sentence by any institution with the authority to make that sentence matter. AFOIA request filed with the Smithsonian Institution in 2020, log number 2020-SI-01122, requested all unpublished field reports, correspondence, and acquisition records relating to Isle Royale archaeological investigations conducted by Bureau of American Ethnology personnel between 1870 and 1910. The response, received 11 months after filing, cited Exemption B5, deliberative process privilege, for all responsive documents, on the grounds that the documents were part of an ongoing internal processing project. Deliberative process privilege applies to pre-decisional agency communications, not to 19th-century field reports. The Smithsonian's application of B5 to 100-year-old archaeological field notes is legally indefensible. The Smithsonian has not responded to a follow-up letter identifying this, sent in March 2021. There is one account from inside the mining operation that the official record has absorbed without resolution. In 1883, a mining superintendent named Edmund Wright, employed by the Isle Royale Copper Company, one of the 19th-century commercial mining operations that worked the island, filed a report to the company's board of directors describing the discovery, during routine commercial excavation, of a feature at the base of an ancient pit that Wright described as a series of stone-lined passages, running in cardinal directions from a central point, with no connection to the ancient working above, as though the passages preceded the pit and were not built by whoever dug it. The report is in the Isle Royale Copper Company's records, deposited at the Keweenaw National Historical Park Archives in Calumet, Michigan, in 1994, when the park was established. The box containing the 1883 board reports has a finding aid entry. The 1883 annual report is in the box. The Wright Field Report is not. It is referenced in the annual report's appendix index, but the appendix is missing. The finding aid notes the missing appendix. It does not explain its absence. Wright died in 1901. His personal papers are not known to survive. The cardinal direction passages he described at the base of the ancient pit, passages that, by his account, predated the ancient mining operation itself, are either still in the rock below the Mycenae workings, or they were destroyed by subsequent commercial mining. They have not been investigated. They are in an index entry for a missing appendix in a box in an archive in Calumet, Michigan, and they have been there since 1994, without anyone with institutional authority deciding that they are worth the cost of a descent into a pit that has been dry for 40 years on an island in a national park that sees fewer visitors per year than most municipal parking lots. The copper is still gone. The pits are still there. The marked chamber in Henning's field report is still in a restricted folder in the Smithsonian archives. The cardinal direction passages in Wright's missing appendix are either in the rock or they are not, and no permit has been issued to find out. The isotopic signatures in Mediterranean bronze are still in the journal articles, unchallenged and uncited by the institution that controls the American prehistoric narrative. 500,000 tons. Gone. The accounting has been open for 180 years, and the ledger still does not balance.